And the
podcast
begins with a song of rebellion.
How can this
podcast.
be my life?
CD burners.
I hear it.
I hear it.
Okay.
I hear everybody. Yeah.
For whatever reason, I can't hear Matt.
Is he on one?
What up? Oh,
Yep, there
There
he
you
there I
go.
is.
am.
Fuck yeah.
There I am. Wow, it sounds awesome.
There's a little hum, but
Coming from
deal.
you, that's pretty good. Coming
these,
from
these
you.
things, it's too easy to do a podcast because you just literally, it has all the compression and everything built in and you just press record.
It should be illegal.
Well, Rode makes really good stuff, really good quality, and it's usually pretty like cost efficient. Like it's an Australian company, I think. It's really good.
That's what you used for your interview last week with Matt Squire. We went Matt Squire to Matt Pryor.
No,
Matt Pryor to Matt Squire.
You know, that is that's happened to both of us like a number
Back
of
to
times.
back.
Yeah, no, I've made phone calls to like people in the past and been like, "Hey, it's Matt Squire," and then I get like, "Okay, so like we're prepping the show and we're doing this, and we're doing that," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's awesome." But it's not Matt Pryor.
Wrong guy.
It's Matt Squire.
It's really rare that I get nervous for interviews. Like it's really rare. I'm just like, I'm pretty. 2 in a row. I'm kind of nervous for this one.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, I hope I can disarm
No,
that.
you already have. You like really already have. I'm Matt Pryor. Matt Pryor. I went down there. Jesus Christ. And I've never been so nervous for a fucking, because, and I spent 30 minutes apologizing to him for something that didn't exist.
That's so funny.
I was like, hey man, I'm like really, I had this thing in my head of he's gonna be mad at me already before knowing me. And so he was like, I think you're overthinking this. And I was like, I think I am overthinking this a little bit.
But if Matt Pryor can't help you through the sad times, like he always has,
Yeah.
then
I left feeling so much. I left feeling like I can listen to the Get Up Kids in a new way, because when I was listening to him before, I was like, I feel like this guy's fucking mad at me. And now I listened to him on the way after that interview, and I was like singing along with it.
it's healing.
Yeah,
it's
it was
healing.
great.
That's awesome.
Did you watch that, by the way?
I haven't watched it yet.
I can't. I don't ever watch anything
Yeah.
that I do.
I'll wait for the
I know how you
edited
feel.
version.
I'm fucking embarrassing, man.
I know how you feel, and it's the same with making records.
Yeah.
It's like I think it's with any art form, you create it, and then it's like it's out there, and like you can't second guess it anymore after a certain point.
I did hear. So,
Commit,
guys,
yeah.
welcome to the pod, Matt Squire, legendary producer. Thank you for coming on CD Burners.
Thanks for having me. This is great to be here. It's an honor. Thank you.
We've talked about a few of the albums that you've worked on, and I'm glad that we get to do it that we get to talk to you about this album in particular. I'm a little nervous because the fans of this band are so intense, but I feel like, that this is better than Morgan and I just sitting here and like getting information wrong
And
so
making stuff up.
And now when I get it wrong, all the backlash will go against me.
No,
That's
you guys-
good. Smart.
You guys can all put it to me. They do it anyway. They are like,
Today we're talking about Panic at the Disco, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, which came out September 27th, 2005. And you just said something that I was listening to a few of the interviews that you've done in the past. And in one interview, you mentioned I Write Sins was climbing up the charts, and you were calling John Janik and you were like, can I please remix this?
Every day. In fact, I was asking if we could have another mixer come in and do a mix on it. Panic was the third full-length record I ever did. It was like really, really early days.
What were the two that you did prior?
North Star, Pollyanna, and Receiving Into Sirens, Between the Heart and the Synapse.
That's a good album.
Thank you.
Love that album.
Thank you. And it was a fun album. The great guys, like just the coolest.
Nice.
But yeah, Panic was the third project.
Wow.
They had never played a show. I was really new. We made this record expecting like, I don't know. Our dream was like to sell 10,000 copies total. And it just blew up, which was such a blessing. And
Is
then
it quadruple platinum now?
is it?
That's-
I know it's triple.
The notes here that I got said quadruple
Sounds
now
right to
I
me.
don't pay attention
as
to
of
numbers.
2023.
I mean, that's
That's
amazing.
wild.
It's wild. It's
all of
Any
that
other
stuff is,
record
like,
that we've talked
arbitrary
about
to
has
me,
gone
'cause
quadruple.
I think you are right. That's the only thing that sounds different. Whenever we do like charts and stuff, I'm like, what is that? I don't know what any of this stuff
I
means.
know it's hard to evaluate. For me, I mean, I think the blessing was that quote unquote inexperience, or that feeling of ignorance. And to the point of the question, like, I mixed Sins really fast. I mixed it through an analog console with the aid of Pro Tools. It was kind of like a hybrid mix. I mixed that song in particular in 30 minutes.
Well, you guys only had like 5 weeks, right?
We had 3.5.
3.5
It was
weeks.
a really tight timeline,
and like a $10,000 budget or something.
13, but yep. And part of that might have been for their living expenses.
Yeah.
So yeah, it shakes out to about that.
Were they living with you? Because I remember the 303 guys were living downstairs or something. Right?
So that's a different
house.
Oh, it was a different house, but the same area of Maryland. The Panic guys were living in the studio. Well, we had an apartment that I rented because the actual studio was zoned commercial and it was a fire hazard. And if anything had happened while they were staying there overnight, it would have been a liability. So I had rented an apartment right before they got there down the street, which was hilarious because they had not, I don't know how much time they had spent away from home, but when I would go to the apartment to wake them up, it was just a mess. And it was like there would be like French fries, just like food everywhere, just like a mess. It was hilarious.
It was like Teen Boys. It's like
yeah,
literally
I mean,
like Teen Boys.
they were. And that's the charm. You know what I mean? And that was the fun of it. The Sins mix answer basically is I mixed the song really quick. I was so mortified when I would hear it on the radio because it's like, just like you're saying with interviews that you've done, it's hard to listen to the stuff after and not hear just all mistakes. And a lot of creative people share that same neuroses, and I was knee deep in it, and I kept calling the label, not just once, like every day, like, can Tom Lord Algae please remix the song? Because that's what we would do in those days, is like Tom would remix all the songs for radio, even if they were mixed by somebody else on the album. And I knew that practice. I was like, I don't care about the point. I don't care about anything. Just like, I don't know. Yeah. It's just driving me crazy. And John, to his credit, was like, dude, you're nuts. It's working.
Yeah.
We're not changing a thing.
So you obviously, and I don't think the label either was expecting it to be this single, right?
No, and that's a really weird story too. The thing about Panic is Panic has actually changed a lot over the years. And so this version of Panic was really a partnership. It was much more of a partnership between Brendan, Ryan, and Spencer. And Ryan was a very, very big driving force of the Fever days. And he was not interested in radio. He was not interested in MTV. He didn't want to do any of that stuff. We put out the album, and the thinking was that Time to Dance would be the single. That was the thinking before we made the album. That was the thinking after. And the band in the studio with me went through this identity crisis with stuff like Time to Dance. They didn't want that to be their signature sound. So we had done half the record with that sound. We did the intermission, which was supposed to be a musical representation of the evolution from one sound to the other. And then the second half of the record is this more orchestral thing. And so we're like 6 months into record cycle, if I remember correctly. We're definitely a few months in. And I'm getting these phone calls every day from either Crush or Fueled By being like, yeah, like, we're all so pleased with the success. It's a total sleeper. We had no idea this was going to happen. So we could just rest on that, but like MTV is calling us every single day. Atlantic is upstreaming it. They want to go to radio. Ryan will not do, like, we don't know what to do. Like, what should we do? And I said in one of these conversations, I said, because we did this weird thing with Fever that had not been done before. There was that site Pure Volume. Do you guys remember? Yeah. I think it became mp3.com after that. This was one of the only digital music sites in existence at the time. So we were road testing the songs. We would put them up on Pure Volume and see like what fans would say about them before we released the album. And we were going one a week up until the album release. And I remembered that Sins stayed at number one. Even when we released the subsequent songs, Sins had this stickiness to it. And I reminded John and Scott Nagelberg, who was their Crush rep at the time, and I think still is. But I reminded them that Sins tested well. Sins is from the second half of the album. Sins will represent Ryan's vision and the band's vision a lot better than Time to Dance. And maybe that's the answer. You know, I know it's a compromise for you guys, but maybe that's the answer. And that's what ended up happening. I'm not sure if I get full credit for picking Sins as a single, because it's not usually my forte. But like that particular situation, it was very difficult to speak to the band about anything that they didn't want to do. And it was really to their credit. They were true artists in that sense. They really had a vision for the show. They had a vision for all the imagery, the record art, everything was very, very, very like well thought out. And if anybody was saying anything that didn't like sort of comport with that vision, they were just not having it.
Dude, this. I have I want to go back to like being in the studio with them, because they hadn't like really played any shows before they
zero.
They went in, and Ryan did like a lot of shit like recording on GarageBand, right? Like, so they're like brand new. They're like, and you said that you were like, this is the third one I fucking did.
Yeah.
Like, were you comfortable around all of the new stuff, and were they like so over your shoulder, but like learning everything? Like, what a cool, and yeah, what was this? What was that like being so new, and both people on both sides being so new?
It's interesting because I remember vividly them getting to the studio and they were setting up. I used to do pre-production as band practice. We would do like a week of workshopping songs, even with a tight timeline like Panic, 3.5 weeks. It was always important to me to be like, is this in the right key? Is it the right tempo? Try this drum fill. Like, let's do this. And a lot of the record was mapped out in that band practice setting. But I remember when they were setting up day one, they had been there for about an hour and they were all looking at this rack tuner, you know, that they had just taken out of the box, and they were trying to figure out like how to get it to like configure or whatever. And I just remember being in my control room and watching this. And it's like most of my friends' bands, I grew up in like the hardcore scene. It's like we had all been playing for a long time. I've been playing shows, DIY shows, since I was like 13 or whatever. So it's like a rack tuner, you know, and I'm not talking shit. Yeah. I'm just
just
kind of
like
giving you the scene.
Is.
Yeah. So I remember calling Scott and just matter of factly being like, I forgot to ask you, like, has Panic ever like toured or played any shows or anything like that? This is me on the phone with Snags, like watching them try and set up. And he said, no, why? And I said, never mind. It's all good. But yeah, I think I was just as inexperienced. And that was what was so fun about the project, is we went into it with no mentality of like, hey, like Brendan's going to need to breathe on stage. That's why the vocals are so crazy. because like we weren't thinking about how are you going to do this. We were just thinking like what would sound cool, but like the vocals are
Stacked. Oh, they're
mile a minute.
No, I don't know if anybody can do that.
I mean, Brendan is an athlete in the truest sense. If anybody could have learned to pull it off, it is him, and it was him, and it became him, but was not like planned. And so the record process is really fucked up because we did that band practice. We were so ambitious. We were like, then we're going to go into favorite things. Then we're going to do this, and it's going to be vaudeville. And like all the stuff was mapped out in that pre-production setting, but we had a mic and a PA that you couldn't really hear. So Brendan blew out his voice week 1 and had no vocal cords, like pretty much the whole process of Fever. And so I kept getting the process basically became like sort of a time management exercise. And that's what I remember most vividly about Fever was we have 3.5 weeks. We were told from the beginning that they were going to be direct support on the Fucked tour, the Fall Out Boy tour. Fall Out Boy had just cracked maybe 250,000 in record sales. We were all, holy shit, like Fall Out Boy. It's like Pete Wentz is a rock star and like, oh my God, they've sold 250,000 records. Nobody saw it coming. It was a really, really electric time. And so Pete had started this label, loved the band, and Panic was going to be direct support just because Pete could. And I kept getting these phone calls every single morning from John Janik and Scott Nagelberg. 30 minutes before the band would show up, I'd get a call every single day like, hey, like, are you going to be able to get the record turned in by whatever this D date was to mastering? And I'm like, have never heard anything like this before. It's my 3rd project. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. You know, like, why is it important? Like, yeah. I'm like an indie rock dude. Like, like, what are you talking about? Yeah. I've just never heard language like this before. I've never cared about any of that stuff. I'm just like an artist and free spirit and whatever. And they were so intense about this deadline. And they kept telling me, like, if you don't get a record done by this X date, then they're not going to get that direct support slot. And, you know, the universe is going to crash.
Yeah, like everything. Yeah. That, look, man, I'm in the same boat as you about all of that shit. If somebody doesn't do something a certain way that changes almost nothing, everything is fucking, I get it. 100%.
That was the message I kept getting. And I just kept, so we finished the pre-production process. A lot of songs got written in the pre-production process. They came in with about 5 or 6, and then the rest, they had ideas that were sprouts, and then we kind of finished them in that pre-pro process, but we did it at the expense of Brendan's vocal cords. And so we're making the record, we're tracking. The beginning of every tracking process is like a Goldilocks zone. No matter how much time you do or don't have, you're kind of like, dude, we're getting drum sounds. This is so fun. And like, we cut drums in 2 or 3 days. We broke Spencer. I remember having to go out and buy that new skin stuff for his blisters because he was literally, I mean, every drumstick was just covered in blood by the end of
I saw that.
take.
I was reading something, or listening to you, something about recording the drums a little bit slower and then speeding them up. Did that have something to do with just
maybe
fucking breaking his ass?
No, it rings a bell for like maybe one part or something like that. And it was more for taste than anything else. And it was more that the tools that we used to do it on Pro Tools were new at that time. I had never done that before. Yeah. So it was less a commentary on some sort of playability. It was more of a commentary on like, we were making a lot of changes. Even though we had done all this pre-production, we were like tweaking stuff the whole time and kind of moving stuff around.
I want to kind of, I know we're like going chronologically and we're in the pre-production era, but
yeah,
since we're talking about, you know, how the songs were put together in pre-pro and then like built in the studio, And then, you know, a lot of this was hinging on them getting this like massive tour. Did you help like sort of untangle the songs from their finished product and help them create, you know, their live, how they were going to do it live at all? Like we talked to Forrest from Hello Goodbye last week, and he was telling us, you know, the first time he ever saw a band play with an iPod was Panic at the Disco, where they panned the click to the left and the tracks to the right. Like, were you involved in that process at all?
Yeah, and I was for a lot of my early projects. I had to be because I had the files, and it's at that time was actually a really difficult process. Like now DAWs have like offline commit and stuff like that. But at that time, you had to reroute everything to bounce it. So I would have separate sessions that were the prep sessions for live. And then it was funny in those days with the iPod, especially because you would pan the click to the right and everything else to the left. But like iPods aren't perfect. So there was like always like a little cross talk. And so there are stories of like click bleed and stuff like that. But yeah, the that part of the process, there was really just no choice. We had so much going on the record, and I think the band felt like they were delivering enough of a live performance that having some support behind it, especially with all the like weird instruments and stuff. I can remember distinctly that we didn't cheat. It wasn't like, okay, there's like guitar solos or vocal parts or any of that stuff that has subsequently over the years ended up in bands' tracks. This was more about like, oh my God, we have an oboe.
Yeah, what are we
How
gonna
are
do?
we gonna do this? You know, like Panic was uniquely weird in the ambition of the instrumentation.
I mean, it was also like, you know, like you said, Pro Tools, like this was sort of new that era, like that era specifically, it was like a lot of new technology was happening. Like, how were they like, oh, can we mess around with this thing while you guys are learning and you're also learning and it's coming out at the same time and you're like, shit, we're up against a schedule. Like, did you guys waste time being like, this is so fucking cool? Figuring
It's so interesting because I've been thinking about this so much. So just a little background. Like, as I was saying, it was hard for me to listen to the record on the radio early. It was hard for me to listen to the record at all. Like, I just was mortified. It was like, I'm so grateful for it. Even in the moment, I was like, oh my God, like a hit. Like, I'm a punk rock kid, like from DC who like slept on a mattress on the floor for years. Like, I have a degree in psychology. I just thought I would be punk rock until 30 and then just go get a job. Like, that was my mission at that time. So like, to have this record go huge was obviously a blessing. And I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe it. We recouped my advance in a week.
yeah, that's like a crazy thing.
It was crazy. But like, I was then mortified because I'm like, oh my God, like, we made this record in this sort of full crunch time mode. We made a lot of snap decisions. There's a lot of band-aids. It was time management was the theme of the record. We had to get it done by that day. We didn't think we were going to make that deadline. I mean, the whole thing was just a mess in my head. So I couldn't listen to it for years. And I never listened to it for years. And I always thought the universe blessed us with a couple of good songs. The intent of the record and the ambition of the record shined through to the fans, and the fans were forgiving of the Band-Aids because whatever. So like coming up on the 20th anniversary, I listened to it again recently, and it's like an acid trip because like now I listen to it and I'm like, if I didn't know all of those battle scars, I would like be like, oh, these guys are doing like theme and variations, like, and it's really cool because like a vocal hook from like one verse like shows up as the bridge, but it's like over a different track bed. But like, that's not what was going on. What was going on is we had made this roadmap during pre-production. And so that bridge, the intent was to have a different vocal part, but we ran out of time. So I can remember me and Brendan being like, well, take a piece of the verse and like distort it and like put it over the techno part in the like, whatever. And like when you listen to it now, and I guess maybe when people listened to it then, they were like, oh, that's so cool. Like that part shows back up. But like, that's not what I was thinking. You know? Like,
I listened.
not at all.
I listened to before we had this scheduled. I've listened to a bunch of interviews with you, and you said something really that stuck with me. Really, like, you know, there's a lot of things that I hear all the time that I'm like, all right, cool, forget that. And then a couple of nuggets all over it. And you said that you learned something from these Swedish producers, where like you really have to listen to it as other people would be listening to it. And you know, I think when you're so attached to it, you can't get away from that Band-Aid.
It is really, really difficult. And I think hindsight is the only true way to do it, because
Right.
you forget a lot of the stuff. You know what I mean? As I've evolved over the years as a producer, I have a couple of other tricks to kind of get a little bit more objective during the process. None of them are 100%. But, you know, there are some methods that I've developed over the years. But at that time, being like completely inexperienced, I had no clue. So to your question about instrumentation, it's part of this big picture where what the intent was to cut drums, cut bass, cut guitars, right? Which we started, and then cut vocals like a normal full-length recording process. And we also had a separate station set up for reason programming. So we were all kind of round robining tracks. But Brendan couldn't sing. He couldn't do any high vocals. We had low vocals, but we had nothing. And like more than half the record is in his high register. And he could not be a better musician. I mean, the dude, you know, like those people were like, you know, it's like Michael Jordan. It's like, dude, he's like this GOAT basketball player, but he's like, yeah, fuck it. I'm going to play baseball for a year and I'll be in the major leagues and it'll be amazing too. And like just those people who can like do
Like it's just
anything.
annoying that they're good at everything.
You're equal parts like enamored and annoyed.
Yeah.
It's that exact thing.
I know
and
that.
I've said that exact thing about Brendan before, and lovingly.
Yeah, no,
But,
it's. I mean, it's awesome that, but it's annoying to me because I'm like, why can't I?
He is the quintessential
Yeah.
version. It's like he's amazing at everything. He's humble and confident at the same time. He's the best guy. You know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah, it's like stop being so good.
it's just amazing. So he was kind of overcompensating for his missing vocal cords by coming in and being like, I know I can't sing today, but I went next door to the band instrument rehearsal rental place and they lent me like an oboe or a clarinet. And like, I think I can play the part in blah, blah, blah. And like, he would just have learned to have played clarinet that morning.
God
so he
damn
could
it.
like lay that shit down. So the instrumentation for Fever is sort of this car crash in a way where like, if he had been able to do his vocals at the right time, a lot of the stuff might not have been on the record, but because he couldn't and we needed to get something done, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to come in and we're going to do some string programming today or like whatever. And then a lot of the stuff was done on that program Reason. That was the only program we knew at the time that you could make like beats or like any other programming kind of stuff. Pro Tools had no stuff for that. And I didn't know how to use Logic or Ableton or anything. So there's Reason programming. There's live instrumentation, and then there's us being self-conscious about Reason programming. So, like, for instance, with Sins, like, the fake strings, Sins we wrote on guitar, and we immediately thought it was too metal. Like, we were like, that would be awesome on a Thrice record as, like, a muted guitar, but, like, that's not our steez. That's not what we're into. So it was like long phases for a while. And it was like, what if we put it on strings? And it was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. We put it on Reason and it just sounded like a toy,
Yeah.
you know? And so we posted on Absolute Punk. Remember AbsolutePunk.net
Yeah,
was like the big news group. And we did a post on Absolute Punk that said, hey, we're in the studio in Maryland. Like, does anybody play violin and cello? And would they be willing to come in on a Sunday and like track? And we got a violin player and a cello player.
Is it true that they were like 6th graders, like middle schoolers?
High school sounds more right, or freshmen in college.
Okay.
And they were as lovely as they could be.
Yeah.
We had no like music like notation or anything like that. We didn't understand that we were speaking like a different language. We were like, it goes like this.
Yeah.
And they had to translate it to their instruments, and they got $50 a piece. And I still feel like mixed feelings about it.
They played one of the most iconic hooks of all time.
I ran into the cello player at an All Time Low show like a year or two later, and she was like, Matt Squire. And I was like, Heather Stebbins, like, what's up? She's like, $50. And I was like, whatever, dude. Like, you know, you
get bragging rights.
You get the story. I said, I got about $50, you know, for the record too, like whatever. But you know, it's a career launcher and it's a memory, and she was cool about it. It was funny, you know. But I can still hear, like, she takes a breath in the intro, and it happens to be on a note that I cut and pasted a bunch of times. It was like a note where we only had one of them that was like in tune, so we kind of did a lot of editing on it. And I can still hear she breathes in the microphone while that note is going, and I can still hear it every single time.
I'll have to listen for that.
That's
I don't know if anybody else will hear
that's
it.
fucking. I think that's like one of the coolest things that I have learned from doing the billions of podcasts that we have done.
Totally.
That's a really that's
That's
the shit
funny.
that, like, I think, you know, we started this because we were like, all right, how do we like do stuff that's just not on Wikipedia and stuff like that? You're just not gonna get.
Let's jump into our voicemails from you guys.
Hey, asshole. Definitely love. Just want a big shout out and really dig your vibe. Honestly, me and my friends all do. I just wanted to say you guys kind of do it right. Your research, your deep dives gets me to revisit an album, or not necessarily a band that I know, but get to know thanks to the pod. So, yeah, I just want to mention to you that this is awesome. Keep doing it, what you do. Also, be nice for an episode or your opinions on like an old school band called the Junior Varsity, not to confuse it with Junior Varsity, which is not an emo band at all.
I know the one he's talking
Junior
about.
Varsity. I think those guys are for Springfield. Anyway, I used to really dig their vibe. I think they're coming up with this 5th wave of resurgence for emos. And keep doing what you're doing. Keep at it at episodes. I really do think that Brand New kind of deserves its own. I know it's kind of canceled out, but it kind of deserves its own episode for like a deep dive. I really enjoyed that deep dive of episodes between Brand New and Taking Back Sunday. So great. I have no idea if I'm going to be at the air or not, but shout out to the people. Later.
Shout out to the people.
Dude, hell yeah.
Thank you. That was such a nice call.
Yeah, it's awesome. It makes me
To the Junior Varsity. They were on Victory Records.
yeah, I remember that band. I know the new band that he's talking about too, who are also good, by the way. But also, you know, it's calls like that make me not bummed out when it's like 11 at night and we had like a long day at work and I'm like researching a fucking, and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Who gives a shit? I don't care what these fucking assholes did back then. And then like doing this and then hearing that makes me feel good. So thank you.
Makes it all worth it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the beauty and the horror of Fever is that, and I would have to ask the band how they feel, but I think they feel the same way, is that like as an outside listener, and when I now listen to it in review, I'm like, this record fucking cool, man. But like all we heard after we released it was like, oh my God, there's a breath in the beginning of Sins, and now it's on the radio next to Kelly Clarkson. Like, like, we suck. We had a really funny moment on the Honda Civic tour. And this, I mean, it got really hilarious really fast. And like the guys are really good natured. They're a lot of fun. And like it got really funny really fast. Like within like months of the record, like they were like 68 pounds each, and they were like having people paint like intricate makeup trees on their faces before they would go out and play. And they were wearing like mismatched Versace designer shoes. I mean, they were just having a blast. They're from Vegas. It was hilarious. And it was tongue in cheek. It was like, hey, like, let's spend all the money on like having like circus people come out on stage like a marching band. And it was not a joke. It was Ryan's vision, but it was like, I was getting calls from management being like, yo, like, the guys are going to break even on Honda Civic. And I'm like, what do you mean? And I have no financial interest in touring at all. So it didn't mean anything to me. And they were like, yeah, they're investing it all in production. And I was like, that's Ryan, like that's just who he is. But it got really funny really fast. And I remember on Honda Civic, I took them out to dinner. And it was the first moment we had since the record where it was just us. And like, went out to a Mexican place, sat in the car after, and it was like this funny moment. Like I'm in the driver's seat, guys are in the back, and it's like, and I think Brennan is in passenger. And I was just like, did you guys ever, like in a million years, think? And like they were like, no, like just cracking up.
That's
like
so
we just
fun.
had this moment of just like, oh my God, holy shit. Like zero intention. And it's so funny because everybody talks about, and I do believe in like intention and manifesting and all that stuff, and not as much as some, but I do believe in it. But like, we didn't manifest that at all. I mean, we didn't plan it. We didn't think it was going to happen. We had no clue. And the story really is, the arc of the story of Fever to me is about that deadline. Because I kept getting these calls every morning like, hey, are you going to make that deadline? And it became clear to me really quickly that this was really important to the people on the other end of the phone. Like that this was like a big deal. And I was like, no, like there's zero fucking chance we're making your fucking deadline. And then it would just be like silence on the other end. And they'd be like, can we get him like a doctor or something like that? And I'm like, sure, whatever you think will help. But we're doing throat coat. He's sleeping well. He's laying off the junk food. Like I'm like doing everything I know how to do as this like amateur producer. And it's just like, I put him on the mic every single day. And it's like, like it's just not happening. Like he's either sick or he blew his voice out during pre-pro or just like whatever. And it's just not going to happen. And I was just like, you guys just need to be prepared for this not to happen. And it was just like, do whatever you can, man. Like we can't push it. There's nothing we can do. And I'm like, all right. So we're overcompensating by recording all this crazy orchestral stuff. We're doing everything that we can do to open up as much time at the end as possible. And I still mixed on an analog console. I had a Trident 70 at the time. So I still needed time at the end to mix. It was not the same process that we have today. And so I just remember being like 4 days away from completion of Fever, 4 days away from this deadline. And I put Brennan on the mic right at noon. He had throat coat tea, like full cup, full mug. And all of a sudden, High Voice was there. And like he had done warm-ups to get it there. And like, like when you get the muscles back to do it, but you're still kind of messed up, like when you sing, your muscles will like rebel even more. So I was like, yo, Beaton, we called him Beaton at the time. I was like, we either cut all the vocals for this album right now, or like we're not making that deadline. And he understood, you know, that it's now or never. So we cut almost all the vocals for Fever on that day.
A day. Wow.
Yeah, about like 6 to 7 hours. I did an all-nighter in Compton tuned all night, and then I started mixing, and I had 3 days to mix it.
Wow.
So it's like I think the beauty of it is that we were like, the whole time making these snap decisions and not overthinking. A lot of people in the record making process, especially now that like it's so computer driven, like a lot of people are like, you know, like going back and forth and trying different versions. And I'm a big believer in it now. But like at the time, like I was just a punk rock kid. Like I was just like, do this, let's do that. Okay, cool. That's not working. Let's do this. Cut that. Like we were just making snap decisions the whole entire time. When the record came out, that's all I heard was all those compromises. And then it blew up and I was like, holy shit, I guess you do never know when something's going to hit because it's a mess. And that's all I thought for the longest time until recently. And now I listen to it and it's all those decisions that make the record special. It's the weirdest fucking thing. It's like I listen back and I go, oh man, like that compromise is what makes that song so fucking cool and whatever, you know, it's like, it was really weird.
You can't plan that stuff.
No,
that's just,
you
it's unplannable.
You can't. You can put a deadline on somebody. And that's what I've learned is that deadlines are actually pretty cool.
Did that help, like that experience help you like move forward with other artists in the like, or prepare to be like, all right, I'm ready for like whatever the world throws at me with any artist whatsoever?
I'd say it helped. I think what happened to me after that was like, I never planned on being a producer. This was never my life plan. Like I was thinking I would be in bands,
So
hardcore
sick,
bands.
you're just winging it, dude.
Pretty much.
That's
I mean,
so
I was
sick.
26 or 27 and I was kind of like, fuck, like I grew up like in a really dysfunctional way. Like I was a really, really wild kid and like just, I think by that age was just grateful that I could like complete a day, you know, that I could actually even create something that could actually get finished. It was my bar for like being like happy and successful was like super low, right? You know, like just like, oh my God, like I'm functioning, you know, that was kind of like what I was thinking. And so all of a sudden it's like, we're making royalty money. My dad was an accountant and never supported anything that I did musically. Like, I mean, he's just, now that I'm a parent, I can look back and go, oh, he was just scared that I was going to have an unhappy life because the music business is very uncertain. But like, that's not how he expressed it. Like, it was like not approved of at all. And I just remember like going over to his house with my first royalty statement because I couldn't read it. And he's an accountant. And so it was a very like logical, it wasn't like a fuck you, dad. It was just like I
need some help.
Yeah, dad, like, what does
this mean?
Yeah. And he put on his glasses and he did some like calculator stuff. And he was like, if it's anything close to what it says, he was like, Matthew, this is like real money. And the amount, I cannot express to you, I can still hear it in my head, the amount of surprise in his vocal tone of just like, I never thought my child would amount to anything in life. And I'm looking at a royalty statement that is like, holy shit.
That's
It's
fucking
like,
awesome.
amazing. So I don't know, at that point I was like, okay, I guess I got to be a record producer.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, Panic's my gig. And then they didn't want to come back to me for record 2. The chatter was that I had been heavily involved in creating Fever. And I think the band felt maligned by that. The reality is that it was crunch time the whole time. I don't remember where I stopped and they started, or they stopped and we were just problem solving the whole time. So yeah, I think I was heavily involved.
Yeah,
in
and
the
like they
process,
weren't going to
but-
be able to get it done without you.
Totally, but
They're just
But it wasn't.
kids.
It wasn't that. I think they were feeling like the chatter was that like I wrote the whole
Yeah.
thing and I micromanaged
Right.
the whole thing, and it's like that's not true at all. And I would never characterize it like that. We were all had great chemistry, and that's what I loved about
Yeah.
it. And that's been my success story the whole time. Is just good chemistry with good people, and we're in a great community like we were talking about earlier of just like the emo scene in general is like a lot of really cool people compared to other music communities. And so like they didn't want to come back to me for record 2. I was so hurt. I was so bummed, to be frank. It broke my heart, like, because they felt misunderstood by the public. I felt misunderstood by the band,
Right.
as hey, like I wasn't out there on doing interviews saying like,
I wrote this.
yeah, like I wrote Sins Not Tragedies. Like I wasn't doing any of that stuff, so it was like I felt really misunderstood. It ended up being, and this is life, but it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, because then I was like, well, you let me into the music business. And like, I never planned on being here. And I'm like, basically pictured myself like standing in a doorway of the music business with the wind blowing at me, trying to push me back out. And I'm like, will you let me in?
Yeah.
There's no way I'm fucking leaving. How do I figure out how to stay? And that's all I've ever cared about is like, how do I survive? Like, how do I stay? And so it was sort of after Panic that I kind of learned some skills. Panic was improv.
It blew the door wide open for you.
So lucky. We really were lucky, and we really acknowledged it. So
Well, it sounds like you do. Like it sounds like you recognize it. There's a lot of. I mean, now, like you're saying, there's so much. It's so. I'm learning it now. Which I have a million questions for you afterwards.
yeah.
But like now, it's like anybody can pick up you guys had to be in there
Yeah.
and doing it.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about, at the beginning of the pod, you mentioned like Panic has changed a lot, obviously. And this record in particular felt more of like a Ryan Ross leading the charge creatively, but it also felt like a partnership. I know that they were like living, you said, in like a 1-bedroom apartment or something all together. Like and they're obviously like teens, like they're young kids. Like aside from like the basis drama aside, did you sense any sort of like tension or push-pull between Ryan and Brendan?
It's so interesting. Such a good question, because I've thought about it a lot. Because again, my interest in all this is people. I love people.
Yeah, your
I have
psychology.
a degree in psychology.
Yeah.
Like I love artists.
I
and
should look at my questions. I haven't looked at my. I haven't looked at my computer one time. I'm locked in.
I'm a big believer in chemistry. And so Ryan and Brendan, without a doubt, were a Lennon and McCartney. Without a doubt. And Ryan being the Lennon, he's not the athlete. He could play, but he could really only play stuff that he wrote or riffs that he learned. He wasn't like a virtuoso in
Sure.
any way, shape, or form. He was the visionary, and that's very John Lennon, right? Brendan is a McCartney. Brendan is like, yeah, I can do that and I can do that. But if you really want to achieve your vision, let's do this. And I'm going to stand on my head while I'm doing it. And then like, I'll like maybe carve an apple and then also sing the song. And like, let's play a little basketball in about 15 minutes. Like he's just like a freak of nature in that way. And so they were perfectly matched. And then Spencer was a really, really good, like I would say middle ground sometimes when the songwriting partnership wasn't seeing eye to eye, because it's like watching it was so intense because like Ryan is like a problem guy. He'd be like, "Dun, dun, dun, dude, that's a cool riff, but like it sounds like Thrice," and then he would just shut off. And it wasn't like Ryan being like, "What if we blah 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 blah?" He would just shut off.
Yeah.
And then I'm more of like a McCartney-ish type. I'm a producer, so I'm more of a problem solver type too. So at a certain point, like me and Brendan would chime in and be like, we're trying to cheer up our friend Ryan, like, dude, like, what if it strings, like whatever. And that partnership was so amazing between them. And then Spence also played that role. It's so funny that you mentioned the bass player drama, because I'm such a big believer in chemistry that Brent being their friend and Brent not being a creative force in the band, I think was also a really good bellwether. And when Spencer called me a few months into touring, he called me, he said, dude, we have to leave for tour. Brent's not even here.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're just done. And I was like, don't do it. And he was like, so pissed. Like, what the fuck do you mean? I was like, dude, I get it. Find an assistant that can like get him to places on time. Do whatever you have to do. Teach him how to play better. Like whatever you have to do. Keep Brent in the band. And he was like, dude, you're the only one saying it. You're fucking crazy. And I was like, it's just never gonna work. It's gonna be real crazy.
And why did you think that?
I just felt like if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, you don't make a good meal. You know what I mean? Like every good kitchen has like these different levels of responsibility and of execution. And actually sometimes it's nice to have the dude who's just like cracking jokes in the corner the whole time. And that serves a purpose. And with Ryan being very serious, I kind of felt like that band could use all the humor they could get, you know what I mean? So I was really against that decision. I understood why it happened, and of course, Jay Wall's great, and I supported it long term and whatever, but it was tough. And I do think to this day, Panic is a humongous success story. Huge.
Massive.
But I think they could have been 1,000 times bigger if the original lineup had stayed intact. And I am saying that lovingly.
Yep.
And I'm saying that as a guy who's allowed to say it because I was there. You
did it.
But like, and I witnessed it. And I just remember being like, this exactly what Liverpool, whatever year, this is what it was. It was two friends who like have this like weird simpatico where they just complete each other in such a amazing way that this beautiful sound comes out. And that's what it was.
I mean, when you went into the studio, you said you're like, I grew up hardcore and punk and all this stuff. Like, personally, were you like, how do I do this? Because you're like used to heavier guitars and faster stuff.
Yeah, it was actually a big debate. That was a me and Ryan conversation because he kept saying, I don't want power chords. The context of Fever is you've got this teenage band whose favorite band was Fall Out Boy, who sounded like Fall Out Boy, who wrote like Fall Out Boy, who got signed by Fall Out Boy and was going to go on tour with Fall Out Boy. But they're smart kids and they didn't want to sound like that anymore. They made that decision the day they arrived at my studio. And they were the ones who came to me and they were like with that problem, like Fall Out Boy, Fall Out Boy, Fall Out Boy, Fall Out Boy. Like, how do we, like, what do we do? You know? And so one of the things was Ryan was like, maybe I shouldn't play power chords. So me and Brendan were showing him all these alternate voicings on guitar. Because I was like, we can keep some distortion on the guitar and they can still be doubled, you know, like my experience. Right. But maybe they're like more jazzy chords. And that's where a lot of the chord forms came from, was that problem solve. And then the other thing that I did for them pretty much on day one, when they came to me with that question of like, how do we differentiate ourselves, is I brought them both the Jellyfish records. Are you familiar with that band Jellyfish?
No.
Jellyfish was like, it came out in like right before grunge. It's so funny. It's like a hippie-ish throwback band that was really into the Beatles, Queen, and all this stuff. And they came out with a song called The King is Half Undressed. I saw the video. They were wearing like Alice in Wonderland costumes and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my God, these guys are amazing. Because I grew up on classic rock and I was like, ah. And then a week later, Nevermind came out. And Jellyfish, that's why you've never heard of them. It was like, who's this fucking, like, everything got pushed aside for Nirvana. So Jellyfish had a lot of these Queen, Beatles, all this stuff that the Panic guys had not really any experience with yet. And I was like, here you go. This is what we're going to do. And they really embraced it. I mean, really embraced it. And that's how we built the sort of like, okay, this is our old sound, nods to Fall Out Boy, but has some like dance breaks into the more orchestral Beatlesy stuff.
Awesome. That's kind of like the perfect segue into this last sort of segment of our podcast where we do, if you like this, you might like that. So Jellyfish, number one. Were there any other like big influences that you brought to the table or that they brought to the table for this record?
So I think Jellyfish is the story, right? I think it soon became an exploration into Queen, Beatles, classics. Obviously, Panic.
They went to Beatles on Pretty Odd.
They really embraced it, you know? Yeah. They really sort of tried to live it. They wore the ties, like the whole thing. They really, really went there. And so, to be fair, I don't remember if that stuff came into the process or they got into that stuff sort of right after. But they really embraced that sort of vaudeville circusy aspect of rock. I think there's some musical theater stuff, you know, in that category of like, if you like, if you like Panic, like, you might like
Hamilton.
You might like
probably
HMS Pinafore. You know what I mean? Like, because Brendan really was that kid. He was a theater kid, and it spoke to him.
Was there any like? I've read that what led to Pretty Odd was they got into fucking weed. Was there any drug use at all on this album?
So it's a really, I'm gonna be frank, and it's a risk.
Who's Frank?
All right, I'm gonna be Frank Jr. So I'm gonna be frank because I know it's an interview. I know it will get heard, so I'll say it with a degree of a grain of salt. But some bands, if you take the drugs away, we wouldn't have had any of the great music. Led Zeppelin, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm a big believer in that. And I'm a big believer in the exploratory spirit of fucking Hendrix. You know, I mean, it's like some bands, like, that's what it is. Beatles, second half. I mean, holy shit. Like, where would we be as a culture without that willingness to explore? But the band came from Vegas. A lot of their family members were like card dealers and addicts, and like Ryan's dad included, you know? And when they came to me, they had never done anything. None of them had ever done a substance, and they were super against it. even throughout the record cycle. It's a big reason that I was like, yo, you got to keep Brent in the band was this. So like they were so sober. And in fact, we would go to like, I remember we won Video of the Year, VMAs. We went to the after party and it's like every star, every celebrity, and celebrities weren't accessible at that time. There was no like Twitter or anything like that. It was very exclusive. And the band was given a list. This is what they requested. Who is everybody's hand we need to shake so that we can get out of the party as fast as possible so we can go back to our hotel and make music. And that's what they would do. They would go for 15 minutes and they'd just be out and they'd be back on their computers. And it was awesome. And I loved it. And it's like, even though I was like, had fallen off the edge like years earlier, I was just like, man, I really commend this dedication, you know, to the music. Brent out, J-Wall in. J-Wall was older, and like in came not just weed. I mean, it went real crazy, really, really fast. And they went out to the desert and they made a bunch of demos before Pretty Odd that nobody's ever heard. I've never heard. It's like a full record that got pretty much scrapped. It was not produced, but like there's a missing record. And then they went and made Pretty Odd. It definitely escalated from like weed into like a whole host of other stuff. And unfortunately, you know, Ryan really couldn't handle this. And it ended up wrecking his life for years and years and years and years.
Jeez.
Spencer too. I think Brendan was mostly, you know, just like pretty mild with stuff. And to be fair, I don't know Jay Wall as well. Like we've hung obviously, but I just don't know him that well. But Ryan really paid the price, and the band really paid the price, and they really, I mean, it's amazing how successful they've been. It's amazing how dedicated the fan base has been. It's just an amazing story in general. To be frank, I would say this is a band that did everything they possibly could have done to try and destroy it. They got really, really, really huge, really, really fast, and were in a very self-destructive manner for a really, really long time. And I was just heartbroken to have been such an integral part of it, to be their therapist in the beginning, and then to be pushed out and not be, and to be like, hey, dude, like, I know if I tapped you on the shoulder right now, we'd be able to figure this out. But like, you're not even giving me access.
Yeah, and like the further away, like the longer the period that you weren't there, the further away it seemed.
I mean, there were phone calls along the journey.
Yeah,
there were phone calls from management being like, it's finally time to bring you back. You know, there's been a story, you know, over the years, but it just never happened.
Yeah.
And you know, I went on to the question was, where does Matt Squire stop and where does the band begin? That was the question that was posed to us by the audience, you know, and I went on to define that for myself, my version of it, and got to work with all these amazing bands. I've been so blessed. I got to do pop stuff for a while and like work with all these like heroic producers that are like way out of my league, and I got to learn from them. And like, I mean, I spent 2 years in Max Martin's camp, like being like, oh my God, you're Max Martin. Like, and I never got over it either. Like every time he'd walk in the room, I'd be like,
I gotta let you know that that's how I feel right now.
oh, come now, man. I'm like,
That's why this is the most well-behaved I've ever been in an interview.
I mean, I feel like I'm
appreciate
never
it.
the one who asks all the questions, and I've been the one who has been
I appreciate
asking.
it.
this is the most, like, literally,
I'm just a fan like you guys, and like, I just like, I don't know. I feel like music's a mystery. Do you have any clue what makes?
You never fucking know.
I just don't understand.
We started
it.
a label like 2 years ago, and it's like the hardest thing I've ever done.
Really?
Yeah, because like it's supposed to just be like, you know, it's stuff that we're passionate about and care about. But like 2 years in, I'm like, well, that is good. Like it's objectively good music, well, and we gave it everything. Like, why doesn't it fucking work? I just don't know.
We had this conversation yesterday, and I don't know either. But like me and my manager Joey, and I'm in with a band called The Funeral Portrait right now.
Yeah, we know them.
fucking awesome.
Yeah, they've played our Atlanta shows a bunch. They're
Oh my
great.
God, they're awesome. Like, and we're kindred spirits in this sort of theater, way.
Yeah, they're so cool.
So we're having this conversation about that very thing. And the conclusion that I've come to over the years is that 100% is the only number. That I've been a part of a lot of projects that have been 98, 99, where like some like crew member is like not fully dedicated to the mission or something. There's somebody, something, could be anybody on the team. And Joey backed this up. Joey was like, yes, like this is gospel. Like something's not firing on all cylinders, so it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Panic, booking agent. I'm getting those phone calls every day. Label, management, band, like me, like every single person who was involved in that project. We all believed that it could be special. We did not know it could be quadruple platinum or any of that stuff. We didn't know it was going to do what it did, but we all felt like it was special. And like maybe record one would be like a foundation for something even more special or just whatever. Like we all believed in it. And, over the years, I've been a part of a lot of projects that were like supposed to be, just like you're saying, where it's like, dude, you're like, this band's fucking awesome. Like, why is it like not clicking? And like, I don't know if you can know during it.
Yeah.
I've only been able to identify in hindsight and go, the tour manager was like off doing something else, or just like some random thing that you don't think is part of that 100% is part of that 100%. Totally cool.
Yeah.
And thank you guys so much for having me. I hope I answered enough questions and didn't ramble too much.
It was honestly amazing. There's
this was awesome.
Nothing that I had here ready to ask
That we didn't cover.
that we didn't cover, and you didn't expand on in a way that I think
Awesome.
that you can't find on the internet.
Yeah, this was really great. Thank you so much, dude.
I'm super grateful for what you guys do too, and it's really an honor to be here and to talk to all of you guys. And we're keeping a dream alive. That's the most amazing thing a community of humans can do. So it's really an awesome thing.
Thank you. That means so much coming from you,
Yeah,
man.
for real. And thank you. Like I said before, without you, we might not be.
Totally.
Goes
Feel the
around
same.
this-
Mutual.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
dude.